So thank you all for joining us for this iteration of our webinar series. So my name is Lucy Tomasini. I am a project manager with the Grower Group Alliance and the Southwest WA Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub, which is also more easily known as the Southwest WA Drought Hub. So thanks again for joining us and welcome to the second iteration of our Building Resilient Farming Systems webinar series, where we are highlighting 6 projects in our transformational program. So the webinar today is brought to you by the Southwest WA Drought Hub, which is led by the Grower Group Alliance. So very quickly, as an introduction to the hub before we get started, so the hub has been around since 2021 and is part of 8 hubs nationally, funded through the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. The aim of these hubs is to provide regionally relevant information and support to help farmers and regional communities to prepare for and adapt to the impacts of warmer and drier seasons. So we focus on collaboration in the agricultural ecosystem, bringing together... Ooh, sorry. Someone... I'll just mute you. So we focus on collaboration. We bring together researchers, agribusiness, farmers, and so forth, industry leaders, to make sure that agricultural research is impactful, accessible, and drives innovation. So through funding from the Future Drought Fund, we sought project EOIs from hub consortium partners that would investigate concepts that contribute to evolving agricultural systems in Western Australian agriculture. So each of these projects is led by a hub consortium partner and delivered in collaboration with growers, grower groups, industry experts, regional organizations, to help ensure that the work is practical, relevant, and grounded in real-world farming contexts. So while the primary focus of these projects is to generate new knowledge, tools, and approaches, some of these innovations may over time contribute to bigger shifts in how agricultural systems operate and build resilience at multiple levels. So today we will be deep diving into Farmanco's research project, which explored how renewable energy developments can be strategically integrated into farming systems across WA to strengthen farm business resilience, support drought preparedness, and maintain long-term sustainability. So it brought together grower insights with economic, environmental, and governance analysis to help farmers better understand the opportunities, as well as the risks and decision-making challenges involved. So today, excuse me, this is me. Today we'll be hearing from Kelly Ryan from Farmanco. And just before we get started, before I pass on to Kelly, a few housekeeping. So please make sure that you keep your microphones off, but you can keep your cameras on or off, whatever you would like to do. This webinar will be recorded and it will be posted on our website, I believe, next week. After Kelly's presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. So there is a Q&A tab at the Q&A button at the top where you can click and write your questions. So I'd encourage you to put your questions in there. If not, at the end, you can also put your hand up and turn your microphone on and ask them yourselves. That's it from me. I will pass on to Kelly now.
Everything's working at my end. Thank you for that introduction, Lucy. Yeah, as Lucy mentioned, my name is Kelly Ryan. I'm the project manager at Farmanco. There are multiple people involved in this study, including Greg Easton, who's one of our management consultants. He unfortunately can't join today. He's doing farm business reviews, but yeah, very much acknowledge his support in this project. So what I'm going to be running through today is what our project set out to achieve, some of the findings and some resources that we have available. and highlight some of the gaps and future opportunities we see in this space. So I just want to provide a bit of a project scope. So this 18-month project was initiated by a growing number of clients that have been approached by wind farm or other renewable energy companies about the potential for projects on farm. So naturally, growers wanted to understand what these proposals might mean for their business and what the companies involved were aiming to do. So given how significant and complex renewable energy integration is, we saw that the Transformational grant offered a valuable chance to support this early stage work. Our focus was a desktop analysis exploring how renewable energy projects could fit within a WA ag system and further understand grower experiences and information needs. So really looking at how renewable energy can support resilience, diversify that income and provide that long-term sustainability. So what has driven this? A bit of context. So in 2015, the federal government set a renewable energy target to reduce Australia's emissions. So this meant at least 33,000 megawatt hours of Australians' electricity had to come from renewable sources. So the renewable energy target consists of two main schemes. The most relevant scheme to this study is the large-scale renewable energy target, which does encourage that investment into renewable energy power stations like wind and solar farms. Additionally, the state government was forecasting a shortfall in electricity supply at 2027, so next year, and 28. And we saw that there is Western Power were investing in transitioning out of renewable energy with that investment into the SWIS. So the SWIS is the Southwest Interconnected System. You'll see that map there on my right, probably on your left. So that's the scope and the context of this project. So our approach was to explore how these projects could fit in within that WA ag sector and to further understand that grower experience. So we conducted a desktop review of local and international studies and did a grower consultation process. So that provided us with a really great understanding of the appetite towards renewable energy. So the questions sought to understand what the growers' experiences were on farm. And so the three types of systems that were identified were wind farms, wind farm turbines to produce green hydrogen, and solar. The most common that came through was the wind farm proponents on farm. So I'll be discussing some of the findings of that, given it was the most common. So I'll share some of the key findings. So we spoke with growers who had renewable energies on farm, those in current negotiations, those that were approached but then declined. So we found that so much variation in every conversation that growers had had. The turbines had a ranging capacity from 5 to 7 megawatts per hour. The number of turbines per property varied from 2 to up to 50. We found that growers engaged negotiation very differently. Some growers formed groups, which we found that they potentially had better outcomes. So they were able to negotiate things around remuneration, success fees, early payments, legal costs, decommissioning funds, and accommodating the CPI increases. In regards to remuneration, there was a great variability there as well. Payments ranged from 40 to 80 grand per turbine annually. And the compensation also included other things, like, as I mentioned before, the success fees, the early payment and coverage of legal costs. It's really important to note that the people that we spoke to, these processes were a very lengthy process. And given the legacy of these projects, obviously attention to detail is absolutely paramount. So the growers that were engaged in projects on farm were very thorough in their evaluation of having renewable energy on farm. So when talking with growers, we found that the proponents' approach varied. We saw that some sought exclusivity agreements and confidentiality clauses. Actually, that was quite common. And they also were targeting growers near high voltage power lines or existing infrastructure. That was probably a critical component in the success of projects. The challenges and concerns voiced by the growers we spoke to, which often led to not going ahead with the project, was around that poor road maintenance or simple things, you know, like gates being left open. We discovered that there was disparities in compensation between growers, which did lead to a few relationship breakdowns and some negative impacts between neighbours and the broader community due to that perceived unfairness. So there was certainly a lot of challenges and concerns voiced to us in this process. So for those that were looking to engage and have renewable energy on farm, some of the reasons why they participated were obviously around the financial benefit. So they were looking at it as an opportunity to reduce debt, look at succession planning opportunities, and grow their business, build their business. Some of the concerns that they had from those that had and also those that were neighbouring were some of the aesthetic and noise issues and the disruption to general farm operations. We did hear that there was a few negative experiences during the negotiations, particularly around the lack of compromise and quite restrictive agreements. Yeah, certainly scepticism and trust issues. Yeah, growers did express concerns around unforeseen negative impacts and a lack of recourse post-project implementation, and the scepticism around the proponents' intentions and transparency. But overall, growers were cautiously optimistic, and the overall tone was positive, and it's certainly an opportunity that they were considering, particularly around that remuneration and with that income serving other purposes that directly aligned with their business priorities. So moving on to that, what is determining the economic feasibility? So it's really important to say that no two agreements are the same, and the core drivers that will determine the feasibility sit with lease structures, so your flat fee or profit share models, so they each have different risk profiles. The project terms, so the lead time before payments, compensation for land access and inflation. So the land use impact, obviously that's a significant one. What area is going to be excluded, understanding where the transmission line is going to be placed. That's quite an important one to consider. And obviously the business variability will affect the economic feasibility. So the profitability differs per enterprise, obviously rainfall zones and the individual farm structure. So there's a lot of moving parts and information that has to be brought together to make that informed decision. Just I wanted to quickly touch on the lease structures. So different developers will do different things, but the typical lease agreements are the flat lease fee and the profit share model. The flat lease fee was probably the most common that came through the survey. So this is basically the payment is tied to the megawatt nameplate capacity of the turbine. So it's a very simple, predictable annual income. So most turbines are 5 to 7 megawatt capacity. So we're seeing 5 to 7 grand per megawatt. And some of the annual payments that were shared with us ranged between 30 to 42 per turbine over a 25 to 30 year term. So this was certainly the most common that came through the survey. The profit share model is, so obviously has a little bit higher risk. Growers receive a percentage of the energy generated each year. So there's a potential for a high income in high generation years, but it was communicated to us that often these turbines under a profit share are probably the first to be turned off in an oversupply. So there's a certainly high degree of risk reward on that. So lots of different factors go into whether or not a project will succeed or be implemented. As I mentioned earlier, it's quite a lengthy process to go from the first knock at the door to a wind farm on your property. So the location and the wind solar resource quality is an important aspect of whether or not it will go ahead. The ease of connection to the Swiss is actually probably the most critical component of determining if it will be going ahead. The buyer of electricity, so much variability in that we found through the study. The number of growers involved, as I mentioned before, that group negotiation strength certainly improved the power of remuneration. So construction, so obviously construction can disrupt seasonal farming operations. So access, livestock movements, fire concerns, biosecurity concerns, things like that. So having a clear construction negotiation guidelines certainly will go towards whether or not it makes economic sense for the grower. And obviously decommissioning is a major financial risk if it's not secured up front. This is probably one of the biggest concerns that was voiced to us about what happens when this all finishes. So yeah, through the survey, we discovered quite a lot of growers were negotiating from day one about how the infrastructure will be decommissioned. So overall, the benefits and challenges that came through the study. So the growers saw that there was a lot of positives around off-farm income, as I mentioned before, the ability to set up succession plans and buffer that seasonal variability. The potential for infrastructure improvements on farm, such as roads, certainly a great consideration, and also the benefit to the community through those community funds. Some of the challenges that were communicated around the sovereign risk and local shire changing rates, changing to the government policies. Obviously, relationships is such a critical part to consider. So maintaining those is absolutely critical. So making sure that those that don't have renewable energy on farm or a neighbour are feeling that they have been considered in that discussion. And in the survey, we found that those neighbouring properties actually have been included in the discussions and they will be compensated even though they don't have infrastructure on farm. So that's a great forward movement to maintaining great relationships. And end of life obviously was a concern with a lot of growers. So moving on to the community aspect, as Lucy mentioned earlier, we looked at the impact on the community. And we spoke with the West Arthur Shire as a really good case study in how at a Shire level they are negotiating this challenge. So I just want to run through some of their experiences. So they were notified about renewable energy in May 2023 that there was going to be a significant number, potentially a significant number of renewable energy projects in their land area. So they tried to engage early to understand the scale and implications as there was multiple proponents looking to invest. And they found that it ultimately could cover up to 50% of the Shire's land. So they organised a multi-stakeholder information session, which included land valuation, noise and heritage experts, legal experts, Western Power and project proponents. So it's a really positive step for the West Arthur Shire to get ahead of what was happening. The session was initially met with a proponent hesitation, as you can imagine, but ultimately it was viewed as a really constructive and valuable experience by all parties. So I just want to run through some of the requirements that they identified if these projects were to go ahead, just to give you an idea of the scale in that space. So they were looking at housing of up to 200 to 400 construction workers and 100 permanent staff per project. So they were looking at how they're going to plan for gravel, water access and community infrastructure demand. Obviously, that is a significant increase in population and put strain on the local resources. They wanted to ensure that the renewable energy projects delivered long-term benefits, and they were seeking a long-term community benefit fund. So their focus was ensuring infrastructure remained useful to the community beyond that construction phase. So obviously local governments and local shires are also going to be impacted by this renewable energy drive that's happening in WA. And I just want to point out this brilliant resource that WOLGA have put together, so a Renewable Energy Community Benefits and Engagement Guide. It outlines 5 key imperatives to ensure the best case scenario for positive local impacts. So understanding the energy, so it goes through understanding the energy shift and what the local risks could be and the opportunities, goes through the priorities and requirements. It seeks to inform engaging the community, negotiating agreements with developers, and developing a local approach to community benefit sharing. So it's a really good resource to refer to make sure the community benefits from these initiatives. Talking of resources, through this project, we developed a couple of resources that you might find useful. We conducted a sustainability analysis, which looked at the economic sustainability, interrogating the Farmanco benchmarking data set to understand what the returns could look like in a typical farm. So I encourage you to have a look at that. We also looked at, so the lit review covers off the grower survey results in more detail, plus some international studies which we thought could be relevant. And there's a flyer there that just hopefully puts it all into one page. Also, I encourage you to listen to our podcast series. So it's a 3-part series. So the first episode is looking at why renewable energies are knocking on WA farm gates. So that's an interview with myself and Mark Fowler, who's a grower that has renewable energy, planned renewable energy on farm. The second episode looks at the finances in a little bit more detail. So that's with Greg Easton, who I mentioned earlier, and Fraser McMillan. So they go into the nitty-gritty of the lease arrangements and also expected financial returns. And the third episode is how regional communities can stay ahead of that. So that was our interview with the Shire of West Arthur. So it's a really good resource to have a look at if you need further information. So overall, the conclusions of the projects, we found that renewable energy can provide economic benefits, but it really requires that strong governance. Good negotiation certainly improves outcomes. Community engagement is absolutely key. Transparency and flexibility to have that trust is a critical component. And the collective negotiation power certainly increases grower leverage. So unlike mining, farmers have 100% power to say no to these opportunities. WA grain growing businesses are successful. They're very efficient and they have sustainable operations and will continue to do so with or without renewable energy. However, the financial opportunities are worthy of further investigation. So probably one of the key messages of this project is that, wind farm proponents need farmers more than farmers need wind farms. So it's just always good to keep in mind if you are a grower and you are negotiating, if you're negotiating with proponents. Some of the gaps, as Lucy mentioned, the intention of the Transformational grant is to very much look at where the gaps are and what further work needs to be invested to move this forward. One thing I've noticed, actually, so it's a bit of a sidebar, but when we were talking with growers, they just really wanted to find out everybody else's experience. They want more information, they want independent information. So there is a real gap there at the moment. And I guess to put that together is we really need to move from a fragmented proponent-led system to a coordinated, transparent and equitable renewable energy framework. So I think the first step really is developing a comprehensive renewable energy financial assessment tool for growers. So a lot of parts have to come together to work out if it is a right decision for the farm business. We need to build a network of trusted, skilled, independent advisors. There's a lot of consultants that probably need to be engaged if you are making a decision in this space. Probably the most common thing we heard from growers is that they had engaged with lawyers to help them through. And a state-endorsed framework for engagement and community benefit sharing model is probably required. I just want to draw your attention to a workshop that's happening at the end of this month. So the Gillamite Centre are running a full-day workshop on renewable energy. So if you are seeking more information, during this workshop you hear from from growers, local government and industry reps to understand the contract frameworks, the planning process and community benefit considerations. So if you're able to make it, both Greg and I will be there and we'll be able to go into a little bit more detail about this project, but also you'll hear from many other people, which could be quite useful. I just want to thank, we spoke to so many growers and local governments and development commissions to get a really good understanding of what's happening on ground. So I just really like to thank them for the support. And I think that's all I've got, Lucy.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Kelly, for that insightful overview. You've done a massive body of work in a very complex and evolving space, and put together really high quality informational resources. So I encourage everyone to go and listen to those podcasts and also have a read of those analyses, as they really are very helpful for growers to make informed and confident decisions. I'm going to take over. So now we're moving on into the Q&A section of the presentation. So please pop any questions you have in the Q&A tab. There's a little button at the top that says Q&A, and you can just write them in. If not, feel free to just put your hand up and turn your microphone off to ask any questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I'll go for lunch.
I might start us off with a question, Kelly. So what is to you the line that intersects broadacre practices and renewable energy investments? So this was a question that we received from an attendee who registered. So what is the most realistic adoption that growers can do that makes sense to their farming systems, economically and agronomically speaking?
Yeah, this is a brilliant question. And I think the most realistic adoption for growers really involves that strategic overview of, and also, making sure they're pulling as much information as possible. Probably the driving factor is to make sure it minimises, disruption to farming operations, avoiding those high valued farmland areas. I really encourage you to go listen to the podcast because Mark Fowler articulated this very well. And as I said, WA grain growers are very successful. They are very efficient. And if this renewable energy infrastructure on farm aligns with their business goals and this off-farm, I suppose, income stream can help them drive their business forward, it's certainly, the financial opportunity that don't limit their operations are really worthy of investigation. But obviously it has to align with business goals.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Ella, you have a question?
Yeah, hi. The Q&A tab wasn't working. I was trying to type it in there, but anyway. Just wondering, with your research and talking to people, what you heard about issues around exclusion zones or where there was a neighbour that maybe was opposed to the project and how that's what the experiences of those have been and how they've been resolved and what space there is for that, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that topic came up through the survey for sure. So where we saw a really successful case was that the neighbour that didn't have the infrastructure on farm was brought in as part of the negotiating process. Setbacks and stuff like that were a part of a consideration to ensure it doesn't impact their general farming operations. So things like spraying, like aerial spraying, for example. We want to make sure that that general farm business activity isn't limited. So if it was, there was remuneration packages made available to those neighbours. So we saw some really positive and I guess considered approaches to make sure that the neighbours weren't significantly impacted at all. We also found that some of the neighbours that didn't have infrastructure on farm, some of the growers that were aware of that there was going to be infrastructure on a neighbouring farm, they were more inclined to get involved because they're going to have it anyway. They're going to have to look at it anyway. So we saw that, the neighbouring properties were brought in and were actively engaged in the negotiation, which led to a more successful outcome. But it is really important to note that, we had a few growers that were just fundamentally opposed, and that's their business and their decision. But I think renewable energy will be going ahead for the long term. So I guess, making sure that all those important stakeholders around, farming property that has the infrastructure engaged is really critical.
Great, thank you very much, Kelly. Mitchell, you have a question? Alex, sorry.
You're right. Alex Mitchell from FDF, Future Drought Fund in Canberra. Has there been any feedback either in, I guess the people who've put infrastructure on and then they've had to sell the farm, so the impact of, contracts in farm changing hands, or even in that succession planning, because this is quite a long-term investment, these contracts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we hadn't discovered that in the study, but it's an absolutely critical question. And I guess if we had a little bit more time, it would be really interesting to understand what's happening over in the East Coast, because they're a little bit further ahead than WA. Absolutely critical question that you've asked there, particularly around land values as well. So something worth looking into for sure.
Great, thank you. And Deb, you have a question?
Yeah, g'day, Deb from South Australia. My question is about when the wind farms have finished, like its end of life, what happens to them? Are they recycled? Are they, are there new ones put up? I'm sure it varies, but do you have any information about like what the different options are for companies?
Yeah, so one thing, as I mentioned, the decommissioning considerations are part of that initial negotiation, and each company will be handling it differently. I don't have the specifics on how things are recycled or what to do with the significant amount of concrete underground. It's certainly something a lot of WA growers are including, that decommissioning consideration, to secure that financial assurance that is going to be handled accordingly. So I don't have that information about WA in particular, but I know from negotiation from the get-go, it is something that growers are making sure is included. It's certainly a concern for sure.
Great, thanks for that.
Anything from South Australia you can share? Is how are growers doing it differently there?
I suppose, it's a concern because some of the wind farms are reaching end of life. Not so much here, but in Victoria. It is something that maybe wasn't front of mind when they were put up potentially, whereas now it's becoming more part of the planning conversation, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, it most definitely is. It's probably one of the most common things that came through, is making sure that it's been thought of. So yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Great, thank you all for your questions. No more questions. Does anyone have anything else they would like to comment or question? If not, we'll probably move on. All right. Well, thank you all for coming to this webinar session. I hope you found it informational. Thanks again to Kelly. That was really great and super, super insightful. I really do encourage you all to go have a look at those podcasts and those reports. You can scan the QR code here to learn more about this project, or you can just type in that URL code. Please also feel free to register for our Hub newsletter to get updates on everything that we're getting up to these days. There's a lot going on. Also, we are running another session in a fortnight, so not next Thursday, but the one after that, to highlight another one of our transformational projects. So please, if you're interested, come along to that. Jess, I just saw you made a post. Yeah. All right. If there's nothing else, thank you again for coming, and hope to see you at the next one.